The porch light burned yellow against the storm, and Karen Hollis pounded on the screen door so hard the frame rattled. "Dad!" she screamed into the empty hallway. "Dad, please, answer me!" The rain hammered her shoulders, and somewhere in the dark yard behind her, a dog was barking, sharp, urgent, terrified, as if it were trying to tell her something she was already too late to understand. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. To understand how Karen Hollis ended up beating on her father's door at 9:30 on a Thursday night in the middle of an October downpour, you have to go back a few weeks to a quieter kind of trouble. It began on an ordinary Tuesday in a town called Heron Falls, Vermont, the sort of town where the leaves turn the color of hammered copper in the first week of October, and the streets smell like wood smoke by 5 in the afternoon. Ray Hollis was 78 years old, a retired postman with knees that clicked when he stood up, and a stroke 3 years past that had left him slower on his left side and softer in his memory. He lived alone in the small blue house on Birchwood Lane, where he had raised 2 children and buried a wife. Karen was 51, divorced, worked as a school nurse at Heron Falls Elementary, and had promised herself she would look in on her father every single evening. Most days, she made good on that. On Tuesdays, she brought him a plate from her own kitchen, meatloaf, roast chicken, a pot of chili if the weather was cold, because Tuesdays she had grief counseling at 6:30 and needed the drive to steady her hands. She had been widowed once and divorced once, and the 2 losses had taught her that Tuesdays were the hardest day of the week for reasons she could no longer explain. That first Tuesday in September, she came up the walk with a plate wrapped in tin foil and a small container of green beans balanced on top, and she knew before she opened the door that the house was empty. She could feel it in the way the porch felt cold under her shoes. She called his name once, then walked through the kitchen, the small living room with its worn recliner, the bedroom with the quilt Ruth Ann had sewn the year Tom was born. Everything was in its place. The television was off. Ray's coat was gone from the hook by the door. His slippers were by the recliner, but his brown walking shoes were missing. Karen stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long second and made herself breathe. She told herself he had gone for a stroll. She told herself the doctor at Heron Falls Memorial had warned her this might happen, and warned her also not to panic the first time it did, because the fear would put a shake in her voice, and Ray would feel it and be more scared than he already was. She grabbed the plate again, some ridiculous part of her thinking she would need it, and walked out into the last of the daylight. The sun had dropped below the tree line. Birchwood Lane stretched east toward the elementary school and west toward the small park where Karen used to push Tom on the swings, and Karen did not know which direction to try first. She chose west because Ray always used to walk west with Ruth after dinner. She'd gone maybe 3 blocks, calling his name in a voice she was trying to keep light, when she saw him. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of the McCarthy house, with his hands hanging at his sides, and he was turning very slowly in place, the way a man turns when the street signs have become foreign to him. He was not wearing his hat. His hair was wet at the temples from the September evening damp. And beside him, pressing its warm flank against his leg with the calm patience of an animal that has done this before, stood a large golden retriever. The dog wore a red bandana around its neck, worn so thin at the edges that the fabric was starting to fray into pale threads. It was watching Ray with soft brown eyes, and when Ray took an uncertain half-step to the left, the dog leaned very gently against his knee and pushed him back into place. Ray stopped turning. He looked down at the dog. His face did something Karen had not seen in a year. It softened all the way through, until the corner of his mouth trembled up into the smallest smile. Karen pulled the car up to the curb and got out slowly. "Dad," she said, keeping her voice down. "Dad, it's me. It's Karen." Ray looked up. There was a blankness in his eyes for a beat. The new blankness the doctors had warned her about, and then it broke like clouds pulling apart, and he said, "Well, hey, sweetheart, what are you doing all the way out here?" "I brought you supper, Daddy. You were supposed to be home." "I was." He looked at the sky, at the sidewalk, at the dog, and then at Karen again. "I must have wandered a little bit. You know how it is." The dog had not moved. Its tail was arcing slowly, back and forth, back and forth. Karen bent down and held out the back of her hand. The dog sniffed her knuckles and pressed its nose politely into her palm. "Hey there, big guy," she said. "You know my dad?" The tail moved a little faster. "He came out of nowhere," Ray said, and there was wonder in his voice, wonder and confusion braided together. "I was walking and I lost. I lost the way for a minute, and there he was, right up against my leg. Wouldn't budge till I stopped turning circles. Smart old thing." Karen looked up and down the block. There was no owner in sight, no leash trailing, no collar besides the bandana. She whistled softly and looked at the dog. "Where'd you come from, buddy? Where's home?" The dog did not answer, of course, but neither did it move to leave. It waited beside Ray while Karen coaxed her father into the car, and only when Ray was buckled in and the door was shut did the dog step back onto the sidewalk. It watched them from the curb as Karen pulled away. In the rearview mirror she saw it turn and trot east, its plume of a tail high and steady, disappearing into the long shadows on Birchwood Lane. She told herself she would not think about it again. She told herself the dog was a neighbor's, and the dog had smelled the panic on Ray, and dogs sometimes do exactly that kind of thing without asking permission. She told herself a lot of things on the way back to her father's kitchen, and none of it held up when the next Tuesday came. The next Tuesday, Ray was missing again. She found him this time on the corner of Elm and Cherry, half a mile from home, standing on the sidewalk with his hands at his sides, turning in slow circles, as if the corner had rearranged itself while he wasn't looking. And beside him, pressing gently against his knee, was the same golden retriever. The same red bandana, thin at the edges, the same soft brown eyes, the same steady tail. "There you are," Karen said, and she did not know whether she was talking to Ray or to the dog. Ray looked up, saw her, and the small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "I told him you'd come," Ray said. "Didn't I tell you, fella?" The dog looked at Karen with what she could only afterwards describe as courtesy. A slow blink, a small step forward, a lean against Ray's leg to keep him steady while Karen came around the car. Ray got in. The dog stepped back. Karen rolled her window down. "You live around here?" she asked the dog as if it might answer. "You got somebody looking for you?" The dog held her eyes for a long second, and then it turned east and trotted away into the evening. The third Tuesday, it happened again, and the Tuesday after that, and on the Friday between when Karen was late leaving work because a kindergartner had thrown up during nap time and she had to wait for the mother to come, Ray wandered off again at 4:30, and she found him on the concrete bridge over the creek, staring down at the water. The dog beside him with its front paws set square on the sidewalk, its head at his hip, its tail moving in that slow, calm arc. That night, after she settled Ray into his recliner with the ball game on low, Karen went out onto the porch and sat on the top step and called her brother Tom. Tom was 47, a paralegal in Charlottesville, married to a decent woman named Marta, who taught 5th grade. And he had not been back to Heron Falls since the anniversary of their mother's death the previous April. He answered on the 4th ring, and Karen could hear a football game on his television in the background. "Car, everything okay?" "There's a dog," she said. There was a small pause. "A dog," Tom repeated. "Every time Dad wanders, this dog shows up. Same dog, golden retriever, red bandana, no collar. It stands next to him. It steadies him. It waits till I come get him, and then it walks away. Every single time, Tom." Karen. His voice was already doing the thing it did, that gentle, managerial thing that made her want to reach through the phone and break his nose. "Karen, honey, you're exhausted. Have you eaten today?" Don't you do that. Don't you tell me I'm imagining it. I've seen the dog 4 times. I'm not saying you're imagining anything. I'm saying dogs like people, dogs like old people especially. There's a stray in that neighborhood, and Dad gives him a treat once in a while, that's all. He does not give him a treat. He doesn't even know the dog exists 10 minutes after it's gone. He can't remember. And Tom, the dog isn't waiting for a treat. The dog is walking him, or holding him, or something. Tom breathed out. Okay. Look, I'll come up next weekend. I've been meaning to. We need to talk about Dad anyway, about what comes next. Marta and I have been reading about this place in Middlebury. He is not going into a home. Karen, he is not going into a home, Tom? Not yet. Not while I can still take care of him. We'll talk about it Saturday. He hung up. She sat on the porch step for a long time after that, listening to the crickets and the far-off whistle of the freight train that ran along the ridge on the other side of the creek. She could see her father through the front window, asleep in his recliner, with the blue light of the television flickering across his face. He looked smaller than he used to. He looked like a man who had walked a long way and finally been allowed to sit down. She thought about the dog. She thought about the red bandana, worn thin like a thing loved past its expected life. She thought about the way it had pressed against Ray's leg, as if it had been doing it for years, and something in her chest tightened. She did not sleep well that night. In her dreams, the dog was standing in her kitchen, looking at her patiently, and when she asked it what it wanted, it laid its head in her lap and would not move. Tom drove up on a Saturday afternoon, at the beginning of October. He hugged Karen at the door and did not quite hug his father, who was sitting in the recliner watching a fishing show and did not seem to know at first who Tom was. It took a full minute of Karen saying, "It's Tommy, Daddy, it's your Tommy," before Ray's face lifted and he said, "Well, look who came all the way up. Where's Marta at? Where's my girl?" "She sends her love, Dad. She had parent-teacher conferences." "Ah," Ray settled back. "Ah, that's fine, that's fine." They ate supper, a chicken pot pie Karen had made from scratch, because she wanted Tom to see that things were still being done properly in this house. And afterwards Ray drifted off in the recliner, and Karen and Tom stood in the kitchen washing dishes. Tom dried and Karen washed, the way they had done since they were children, and for a few minutes it was almost easy. "So," Tom said, "the dog." "The dog." Karen kept her eyes on the plate she was scrubbing. "When does it usually happen?" "Late afternoon, between 4 and 6, right before dark." "Well," Tom set down the dish towel, "then tomorrow we watch. If Dad goes out, we follow him. Not too close. We just see where he goes and see if this dog really shows up." "He shows up." "I'm not disagreeing with you, Karen. I want to see it for myself, that's all." She put down the sponge. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." Sunday came in cold and clear. The sky over Heron Falls was the color of clean glass, and the maples along Birchwood Lane were burning red against it. And by 4 in the afternoon, Karen and Tom were sitting in Tom's Subaru, parked 2 houses down from Ray's driveway, sipping coffee out of paper cups and pretending they were not both nervous. Ray was on his front porch in his cardigan, looking up at the trees. At 4:15, Ray stood up, patted the porch railing twice, a gesture Karen realized she had seen him make 1,000 times in her childhood without ever noticing it, and walked down the steps and turned east on Birchwood Lane. "Here we go," Tom murmured. He turned the key. He rolled the Subaru forward at walking speed, keeping half a block behind. Ray walked with more certainty than Karen had seen in him in months. His stride was steady. His chin was up. He crossed at the corner of Birchwood and Maple without looking down at the curb the way he had started doing lately. He turned right at the little brick post office where he had worked for 31 years and walked past it without so much as a glance, and Karen felt something turn over in her chest because he almost always stopped and looked at the post office. And today he did not, because today he was going somewhere and he knew it. Halfway down the second block, the dog appeared. Karen never saw where it came from. 1 second Ray was walking alone, and the next, the golden retriever was at his hip, matching him stride for stride, the red bandana bright against its cream fur. Ray did not startle. He did not even look down. He put his hand out and rested it lightly on the dog's shoulder blade, the way a man rests his hand on the shoulder of an old friend. And they walked on together. "Oh my God," Tom said quietly. "I told you. Karen, I told you, Tom." They followed. The dog steered Ray through 3 blocks with a quiet precision that no one who has not watched it could believe. A small nudge here, a pause at the corner there, a gentle press against his knee when Ray's foot hesitated at a cracked slab of sidewalk. They crossed the entrance to Elm Street Park, went past the old bandshell, and turned down a gravel path lined with oak trees. The path descended in a slow curve toward the small pond at the back of the park, the pond where Karen had ice skated as a child and where the town still put up lanterns at Christmas. Ray walked as if the path were pulling him. His chin lifted. The dog stayed pressed against his leg the whole way down. They came at last to a small bench at the edge of the pond, half in shadow under a big oak. Ray sat down without hesitation, the way a person sits in a place they have sat 1,000 times. The dog laid its head in his lap and closed its eyes. Karen and Tom stopped on the path about 30 feet away. Neither of them moved. Karen realized she was holding her breath. Ray was looking out over the pond with an expression on his face that she had not seen on him since her mother's funeral. An expression that was not grief and was not joy, but was some quieter thing behind both of them. A stillness a man wears when he has arrived where he was going. Tom stepped forward first. Karen followed. They came up on the bench slowly, the way you approach a wild thing you do not want to spook. The dog opened one eye and watched them, and did not move its head from Ray's lap. "Dad," Tom said softly. "Dad, we're here." Ray turned his head. He smiled at Tom. "Well," he said, as if he had been expecting them all along. "You made it." It was then that Karen saw the plaque. It was bolted to the backrest of the bench, a small rectangle of dark bronze that had gone green around the edges from 4 winters of weather. She stepped closer and bent down to read the words engraved on it. The letters were simple, unfussy, chosen by a man who had never had much use for flourish. In memory of Ruth Ann Hollis, she sat here every morning and made the world feel quieter. Karen straightened. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked at Tom. Tom had come around the other side of the bench, and he was reading the plaque too, and his face was doing something Karen had not seen it do since he was 7 years old, and had understood for the first time that his hamster was actually not going to wake up. "Daddy," Karen said. Her voice came out thin. "Daddy, when did you put this here?" Ray blinked at her slowly. He looked at the plaque. He looked at the pond. He looked down at the dog, whose head was still resting in his lap. "Well," he said, "after your mother died, I asked the parks people. They were real nice about it. Didn't charge me hardly nothing. You never told us, didn't I?" "No, Dad, you never told us." He considered this. Then he shrugged, the small, tired shrug of a man who had made a private decision a long time ago and could not now remember why he had not shared it. "Well," he said, "it wasn't for you. It was for her. And me." Tom sat down on the grass beside the bench. He put his face in his hands for a long moment. When he lifted it, his eyes were red. Karen sat down on the bench on the other side of her father and took his hand and held it. Ray's hand was cool and thin. His skin felt like paper folded 100 times. The dog looked up at Karen with those soft brown eyes, and its tail moved, once, twice, a slow reassurance. "How often do you come here, Daddy?" Karen asked. "Every day," Ray said. I come every morning. Every morning? Every morning. Been coming every morning since your mother went." He looked at the pond again. "Some days I don't remember much. Some days I don't even know it's morning. But my feet know the way. My feet always know." Karen sat there and watched the oak leaves drift down onto the still water of the pond, one and then another, and she understood, with a sudden clarity that took her breath, that her father had been walking to this bench every single day for 4 years, in every weather, through every stage of the fog that had been quietly settling over his mind, and none of them had known. Not her, not Tom, not the doctors. Only Ray, and only the deepest part of Ray, deeper than words, deeper than memory, had known. And the dog. The dog had known. The dog had learned the walk with him. "Whose dog is this?" she said, and her voice broke on it. "He's mine," Ray said simply. And then, after a moment, "Or I'm his. I get those two mixed up." They sat on the bench for another 20 minutes. No one spoke. The pond was quiet. The oak leaves drifted down one by one, and when at last the shadows had climbed all the way to Ray's shoes, the dog lifted its head off his lap and stood up and gave a small, bright shake, and Ray patted the bench beside him and said, "All right then. Time we headed home." He stood up carefully. He held Karen's arm, and the three of them walked back along the gravel path, with the dog padding beside them, unbothered by traffic, unbothered by strangers, unbothered by anything except the safe delivery of a man he had chosen to escort. At Ray's driveway, the dog stopped. Karen turned around. "You coming in, buddy?" she said, and she meant it as a joke, and it did not come out as one. The dog looked at her and did not move. It waited until Ray was on the porch and the door was open, and then it turned and trotted east down Birchwood Lane and disappeared around the corner of the McCarthy house. Karen and Tom stood in the driveway and watched it go. "Tom," Karen said quietly, "I know. That dog belongs to somebody. I know. We need to find out who." They started the next morning. Tom stayed on through Monday, called his boss, told a small lie about a family emergency, and by lunchtime they were in Karen's Corolla with paper coffee cups and a list of every animal shelter, veterinary clinic and dog groomer within 20 miles. They stopped first at Heron Falls Veterinary on Route 15. The receptionist, a young woman with a nose ring and a kind face, looked over the counter at Karen's phone, where Karen had a somewhat blurry photograph of the dog she had snapped that morning from her kitchen window as the dog trotted past on the sidewalk, and shook her head. "Sorry, Ma'am, I've never seen him. That's a beautiful boy, though. He's got real soft eyes." She turned the phone to show it to the vet tech who was passing behind her. "Marcy, you know this guy?" Marcy squinted. "Nope, but that bandana. That's an old-school knot. Nobody ties a bandana like that anymore except older folks." "Older folks?" Karen said. "Yeah, kind of a Boy Scout knot. My grandfather used to do them. Farmers, veterans, that kind of thing. Guys who learned to tie knots in a certain way and never learned another way." Karen and Tom exchanged a look. It was the first thread they had. Older man, veteran maybe, someone who had loved this dog long enough to teach a specific knot. But when they asked the receptionist to check the vet's records for any golden retriever whose owner might be an older gentleman in the area, she came back after 20 minutes with a printed list of 43 names, and none of them, when Karen and Tom called through the list over the following 2 days, admitted to owning a golden retriever with a red bandana. 2 people hung up on them. One old woman told them off for calling during her programs. A younger man promised to think about it and never called back. And by Wednesday morning, Karen was staring at the list with the eyes of a person who has understood she is looking in the wrong place. "Maybe it doesn't have a home," Tom said. He was standing at the kitchen counter making toast. Ray was still asleep in the back bedroom. "It has a home. Car. We've called 40 people. It has a home, Tom. Look at it. That is a dog somebody loves. That bandana has been tied on that dog by hand 100 times. That is not a stray. Then whoever owns it is either lying to us or doesn't want to be found. Or doesn't have a phone. Karen looked up. Or is old. Or lives alone. Or something. She set the coffee cup down. And that was when she remembered Mrs. Ellery. Nella Ellery lived 2 houses down from Ray, in the small yellow bungalow with the daffodils along the walk. She was 84 years old, sharp as a fillet knife, and had known the Hollis family since Ruth was pregnant with Karen. She had been at the funeral. She had brought casseroles for a month afterward. She had. Karen remembered now, sent a card 3 times over the last 2 years, offering to sit with Ray in the afternoons if it would help. Karen had always said thank you and never taken her up on it, because she had told herself Ray did not need a sitter yet. Karen walked over that morning with a package of ginger cookies from the bakery on the square. Mrs. Ellery answered the door in a flannel housecoat and pink slippers, and her face lit up at the sight of Karen. "Well, land sakes, come in, come in. Put those cookies on the counter. I'll put the kettle on." They sat in the small parlor with china cups of black tea, and Karen told the whole story. She told about the wanderings, and the dog, and the bench, and the plaque. Mrs. Ellery listened without interrupting, her small blue eyes fixed on Karen's face, one veined hand curled around her teacup. When Karen was done, Mrs. Ellery was quiet for a long moment. "That be Copper," she said at last. Karen went very still. "Excuse me, that dog. It'd be Copper. Your mother named him, called him Copper for the color of his coat. I remember because I said, 'Ruth Ann, that's a boy's name, and she's a girl.' And your mother said, 'Nella, this dog is exactly whatever she pleases herself to be.' Turned out to be a boy after all, so she was right on both ends." Karen set her teacup down. Her hands were shaking. "Mrs. Ellery, my mother didn't have a dog. No, not a dog she owned, a dog she visited. Started up the summer before your mother took sick. There was a fellow, older gentleman, walked his golden retriever through the park every morning. Your mother started up a friendship with him. Nothing untoward, mind you." Mrs. Ellery held up a warning finger, though Karen had not so much as opened her mouth. Nothing untoward. Just 2 old souls who had lost their people, sitting on a bench together, watching the water. She used to tell me about it. Told me she never told your father because she thought he'd read it wrong, and she didn't want to hurt him. But it was the dog she loved, the dog she'd wait for. The dog was the reason she went every morning. That's what she said. She said, "Nella, that dog looks at me like I have somewhere important to be. And it makes me want to be somewhere important." Karen could not speak for a long moment. Finally she said, "Who was the man?" "Dolan, Frank Dolan, widower. Lives out on the other side of the creek somewhere. Off Ridge Road, I think. Used to be a lineman for the electric company, and before that he was in the Navy. Older than your mother by maybe 5, 6 years. Real quiet man. I met him at your mother's funeral, standing at the back with a hat in his hands. Wouldn't come up. Left before the reception. I never told anyone he was there because I wasn't sure it was my place." "And the dog?" "The dog was there too. Sat in the truck the whole service. I saw him through the window when I went out to help Loretta carry in her hot dish. Sat in the truck with his nose against the glass, watching like he knew what was going on." Karen sat there in Mrs. Ellery's parlor and felt her whole understanding of her mother shift gently, the way a picture on a wall settles an inch to the left after a small earthquake. Her mother had had a friend. Her mother had had a dog she loved that no one had known about. Her mother had kept a small kind secret that had been meant, Karen understood suddenly, not as a hiding, but as a protection of Ray, of his pride, of his gentle, old-fashioned soul. And Ray had known about the bench. Ray had put up the plaque. Ray had been walking to Ruth's bench every morning for 4 years without ever once saying a word about it. Ray had had his own quiet. "And now the dog," Karen said. "And now the dog," said Mrs. Ellery. She reached across the little parlor table and covered Karen's hand with her own. "Sweetheart, that dog knew your mother. He walked your mother home more than once when the arthritis in her hip got bad and she couldn't hardly get up off the bench. That dog knew Ruth, and I suspect that dog knows Ray by scent because Ray has been coming to that bench every day since. And now the dog has decided that Ray is his to look after. That's what a dog does. That's what a good dog does." Karen walked home slowly. The daffodils were long gone. The walk was lined with the yellow and brown of fallen leaves. She did not go straight into her father's house. She went down to the corner and stood there for a long minute, looking east down Birchwood Lane, in the direction the dog always went, thinking about a widower named Frank Dolan out somewhere on Ridge Road. And she felt the shape of things she still did not know, pressing at the back of her mind like weather. She was going to look for Frank Dolan. She had already decided. But before she could, on the following Tuesday, her cousin Preston arrived. Preston Hollis was the son of Ray's older brother, who had gone into insurance in Boston in the 60s and never really come back. Preston was 58, a real estate developer, and he wore expensive shoes to funerals. He had come to Ruth's funeral in a black cashmere overcoat and had spent most of the reception looking at the fireplace mantel in Ray's living room, which Karen had noticed at the time and had chosen to say nothing about. He had not called Ray in the 4 years since, and now here he was, in Ray's driveway, in a silver SUV with Massachusetts plates, and he was helping a woman in a beige pantsuit out of the passenger seat. "Karen," Preston said when she opened the door. His smile was very white. "Sweetheart, you look wonderful. I know we should have called. May we come in? This is Michelle Vega. She's an old friend, family social worker. I just wanted her to meet Uncle Ray. Nothing formal, just an introduction." Karen let them in because she did not know how to keep them out without a scene, and Ray was in the recliner. Preston went over and shook Ray's hand too hard. "Uncle Ray, it's Preston. Danny's boy, remember? God, look at you. You look great. You look so great." Ray blinked at him. "Danny," Ray said slowly. "Danny, your father." "That's right, Uncle Ray. That's right. He passed." "Yes, sir, 19 years ago." "I remember," Ray's brow furrowed. "I remember that. It was in the spring. That's right, Uncle Ray. You got a great memory." Michelle Vega, from her seat on the sofa, made a small mark in a small notebook and looked up with a very calm, professional smile. Karen sat in the wingback chair by the window with her hands folded in her lap and watched Preston steer the conversation. He asked Ray about the weather. He asked Ray about the ball game. He asked Ray, in a gentle voice, if he knew what he had eaten for lunch, and Ray thought about it for a good 10 seconds and said, I had a sandwich, didn't I, Karen?" "Grilled cheese, Daddy, with tomato soup." "Grilled cheese with tomato soup," Ray repeated, satisfied. He nodded at Preston. "Tomato soup. That sounds wonderful, Uncle Ray. And who made it for you?" "Karen made it." "Karen makes lunch every day?" Ray considered. Karen comes and does the things." He trailed off. He looked at Karen with a sudden fright in his eyes, the way he sometimes did when a sentence unraveled in his hands, and Karen felt her stomach turn over. "Every day at noon, Daddy," she said gently, "and every evening at 6. You know that. Don't you worry." That's a lot of time out of your day, Karen," Preston said in the same warm voice. "That's really something. That's real dedication." "Michelle, isn't that dedication?" "It certainly is," Michelle Vega said. She made another mark in her notebook. Karen understood then exactly what was happening in her father's living room. She stood up. "Preston," she said, "may I speak with you in the kitchen for a moment?" He followed her, still smiling. She shut the door. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was low and hard. Karen, don't do this. I'm here as family. Michelle is a professional courtesy. She's here to observe, nothing more. To observe what? Whether Uncle Ray is safe here. Karen, come on. He didn't know who I was for a good 10 seconds. He couldn't remember what he had for lunch. This is elder isolation. This is, you know what this is. He knows who I am. He is not isolated. He has me every day. Karen, you're one person. And this house is worth some money now. Did you know that? The whole street is coming up. That little blue house of his is worth maybe $280,000 on the market today. In Middlebury, there's a beautiful place, Willow Ridge Memory Care. I've toured it. Private rooms, full nursing, a garden, a small chapel. And the sale of this house would cover almost 3 years of care. He is not going into a home. He is happy here. He walks every afternoon. He has a routine. Preston tilted his head. His smile did not move. About that walking, Karen. Michelle heard from a neighbor. Ray has been getting lost. He's been wandering into traffic. The neighbor was very concerned. She said if you all didn't do something soon, she was going to have to call Adult Protective Services herself. Which neighbor? That's confidential, sweetheart. That's the whole point of a mandatory reporter law. But I want you to hear me. If this goes formal and Michelle here has to file, it takes it out of the family's hands, and that's the last thing any of us want. So we do it kindly. We do it privately. We move him to Willow Ridge. We sell the house. We set up a trust. I've already spoken with an attorney in Burlington, actually. And he says a conservatorship is very straightforward in a case like this. You want a conservatorship? Karen's voice was flat. You, not Tom, not me. You. Well, Karen, sweetheart, no offense, but you are a school nurse and Tom is a paralegal and I have some experience with this kind of thing. I've done it for my own mother. I know what I'm doing. Get out, Karen. Get out of my father's house. Take that woman with you. Karen, I am not the enemy here. I am trying to help you. This is going to happen with or without you. It is better if we do it together. Get out. Preston looked at her for a long second. His smile finally dropped. In its place was a face she did not know, a cold face, an expensive face, the face of a man who had already run the numbers on Ray's house and calculated the cost of care and priced the difference and decided the difference was worth something. All right, he said. All right, Karen. I understand you're upset. We'll talk about this when you've had time to think. He collected Michelle Vega. He kissed Ray on the top of the head, which Ray endured with a small, confused blink, and they let themselves out. Karen stood at the front window and watched the silver SUV back out of the drive and turn east on Birchwood Lane. She waited until it had turned the corner. Then she sat down on the floor beside her father's recliner and pressed her forehead against the arm of it, and she did not cry, but she came very close. That night, she called Tom. He is trying to take Dad's house, she said. He's got some social worker friend making notes. He's talking about a conservatorship. He is trying to move Dad to a memory care place in Middlebury so he can sell the house on Birchwood. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Karen, I'm going to be honest with you. Some of what he's saying is not wrong. Dad does need more care. He has been getting lost. He is not lost, Tom. He is walking to Mum's bench. And that is beautiful. And that is also not safe. He's 78 years old and his cognition is going, and one of these afternoons that dog is not going to be there and he's going to walk in front of a truck. So we hire someone. With what car? Dad's got Social Security and a small pension, and neither of them together will pay for a full-time home aide. Then I'll do it. I'll cut my hours at the school. I'll move in. And burn out in 6 months. And then what? She did not answer. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Carr, listen. I don't want Preston to run this either. I don't like him. I never have. But if he gets a court to appoint him, we lose the ability to have any say at all. So we need to be smart. We need to get ahead of him. How? I'm going to call my firm's family law group tomorrow morning. There is a partner there who does elder law. She owes me a favor. I will find out what our options are before Preston finds out ours are gone. In the meantime, you keep a log. Every wandering, every recovery, every meal, every hour you spend, and do not let Michelle Vega back in that house, do you hear me? I hear you. And Karen, find the man with the dog, Frank Dolan, find him. If Copper is Mum's dog, if Copper knew Mum, then he is a witness to something none of us understood. I don't know what that gets us, but it feels important. Find him. She found Frank Dolan on the second day of trying. She had driven out to Ridge Road 3 times, first in the afternoon and then in the evening, trying to figure out which house belonged to a widower with a golden retriever. Ridge Road was a long, twisting county road that climbed up out of town and ran along the top of the low hills east of the creek, and there were maybe 18 houses along it, mostly farmhouses set back from the road behind maple stands and stone walls. On the third try, she saw the mailbox, F. Dolan in careful hand-painted letters on a dark red flag. The driveway was gravel, long, and at the end of it stood a small white clapboard farmhouse with a porch that ran along the front, and a barn behind it that had once been red and was now mostly the color of old iron. There was a pickup in the driveway, and there was a dog on the porch, and the dog was Copper. Copper stood up when Karen pulled in. He did not bark. He came down off the porch and stood on the driveway with his tail moving slowly in that steady, patient arc and watched her get out of the car. The screen door opened. A man came out onto the porch. Frank Dolan was tall and thin, in a grey canvas coat and worn work boots, and he had a face like a wooden board that had been left out in the weather for 80 years. His hair was mostly gone. What was left was white. He held the screen door with one veined hand. He looked at Karen for a long, long moment. "Ma'am," he said finally. "Mr. Dolan? That's me. My name is Karen Hollis. I think you knew my mother." He did not answer right away. His eyes were the color of a January sky. They filled up very slowly. Not tears exactly, more like the way still water fills a bowl when you set it under a faucet. He nodded once. He held the door open. "Come on in," he said. "I'll put the kettle on." She sat at his kitchen table. He put a cup of black tea in front of her and one in front of himself and a small plate of oyster crackers between them, and Copper lay down on a braided rug beside Frank's chair and put his head on his paws and watched them both with those steady, soft brown eyes. "How long have you had the dog?" Karen said. 10 years last spring. Got him from a farmer up in Enosburg when he was a pup. My wife Marnie named him. She died the year after we got him. Cancer real fast. So it's been just me and Copper for 9 of the 10 years. My mother. Ruth? Yeah. He looked down at his tea. I met Ruth on the bench by the pond. I used to walk Copper there every morning. My Marnie was buried in Elm Street Cemetery, just up the hill from the park, and I got in the habit of walking Copper past the grave and then down through the park and sitting for a spell before going home. Ruth started coming around, I don't know, maybe 6 months into it. She said she just liked the pond. We didn't talk much at first. Then we did. She was the finest person I ever met, next to my Marnie. She and I got to be friends, not the way people think. Friends. Mrs. Ellery told me. Nella Ellery is a good egg. He almost smiled. Nella knew from the beginning. I think Ruth needed to tell somebody. She didn't want to worry Ray about it, and she was right about that. Ray is, an old-fashioned man. He would have been hurt, and there was no reason to hurt him. It wasn't that kind of thing. I understand. Do you? He looked at her. I don't mean that unkindly, ma'am. I don't know how to explain it. Ruth and I had lost the same thing at the same time. Not the same person, obviously, but the same shape of a person. The person you have your morning coffee with. The person you look at when the news is on. When you lose that person, the mornings get very long. And the pond was a place where the mornings could be shorter. That's what Ruth said. She said, "Frank, this bench makes the morning shorter." Karen swallowed hard. "She named your dog." "She did. I'd been calling him Buddy, which was a lazy name for a dog like him." Ruth said, "Frank, that dog is the color of a copper kettle. His name is Copper." And it was. And from then on it was. And now Copper is walking with my father. Frank Dolan set his tea down. He folded his hands. He looked at Karen for a long moment. "Mom," he said, "I owe you an explanation, and I have been meaning to give it for weeks, and I did not know how to start. When Ruth died, I stopped going to the bench for a while, couldn't bear it. Then one morning I went back because Copper wanted to. Copper had been walking with me and Ruth for 2 years, and he had it in his head that the bench was a place we went. I couldn't take that from him, so I went back. And a few weeks in, I saw a man sitting there, an old man, older than me, with a stroke pulling one side of his face a little tight. He was sitting on Ruth's bench, and he was crying. Not loud, not so anyone would notice from the path. Just tears sliding down his face while he looked at the water. Copper knew him. Copper went right up and put his head in the man's lap the way he used to do with Ruth. And the man put his hand on Copper's head and said, "Well, hello there. I know you. I know you from somewhere." And I figured out who he was pretty quick. "You never told him." "No, Ma'am, I never told him. I sat on a bench across the path and watched them, and I didn't want to interrupt. Not that day. And then a lot of days after. Your father was working through something on that bench, and I was working through the same thing, and Copper was helping us both without either one of us having to make small talk. That went on for 2 years, Ma'am. 2 years. I saw him almost every morning. Sometimes we nodded. Once or twice we said good morning. Mostly we just sat at opposite ends of the pond, with the same dog moving between us. And then this summer he started coming later and getting there wrong. 2-3 times he sat down on the wrong bench, one of the ones over by the bandshell, and looked around like he wasn't sure how he got there, and Copper started nudging him back to Ruth's bench. And then one afternoon, back in September, Copper came home late, real late, and when I asked him where he'd been, he couldn't tell me, but I put it together the next day. Copper had started walking Ray home. Every time Ray got confused, Copper would show up. I don't know how he knew. I've heard dogs can smell it on a person, that fog. I don't know. All I know is Copper made a choice. And the choice was that this man needed him more than I did. So every afternoon around 4, Copper comes here to me, eats his supper, drinks his water, and goes out through the dog door. And he doesn't come back till after 7, and he smells like your father when he comes back. Like your father's soap, that green bar of Irish Spring your father must have used for 40 years. Karen was crying. She wasn't trying to hide it. Frank pushed a paper napkin across the table. "I would have come to you sooner," Frank said. "I would have. I didn't know how to introduce myself. What was I going to say? That I was your late mother's friend and now your father's dog watcher. I couldn't figure the right way in." "You just did," Karen said. She wiped her nose. "You just did." He reached down and put his hand on Copper's head, and Copper made a small, satisfied sound, and Karen watched the two of them. And she felt for the first time in weeks that she was not alone in this fight. "Mr. Dolan," she said, "I need your help." "Ma'am, anything." "There is a man, my cousin. He's trying to have my father declared incompetent and put in a memory care facility so he can sell my father's house. He has a social worker friend who is helping him build a case. He is coming for us." Frank Dolan's blue eyes did something. They did not change color, they did not change shape, but something in them went from soft to iron. "I see," he said. "I don't know what to do, Mr. Dolan. My father he is not well, that's true, but he is not gone, and he is happy on Birchwood. He walks to the bench, he remembers my mother, he is still Ray, and this cousin is going to take him away from that, and he will die in that place. I know he will. Frank Dolan sat there for a long moment. He rubbed his chin with the back of his hand. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I have a suggestion, if you will hear it." "Anything. I do not know your father except from a distance, but I know his walk, I know his schedule, I know his dog, and I know your mother would not have wanted this. So here is what I propose. I will move in for a while." "Move in?" "Not into your father's house. That would be improper, and it would give your cousin ammunition. My son and his wife have a small cottage out behind the barn here that they rent out in the summers. It's empty this time of year. I will rent it to your father. I will pay him a nominal rent to keep it above board, and in exchange I will be at your father's house every morning at 7 and every afternoon at 4. I will make his breakfast. I will walk him to the bench in the afternoon. Copper will be with us. We will be a 3-legged stool, ma'am. Me, Copper, and you. Your brother comes when he can. Your cousin does not get to make the case that Ray is alone. Mr. Dolan, please, call me Frank. Frank. That is more than I can ask." "You are not asking," he said. "I am offering. Ma'am, your mother was my friend. Your father has been my quiet companion on that bench for 2 years, whether either one of us admitted it or not. And Copper has already voted with his feet. I'm just following my dog." She could not speak for a moment. She stared down at her tea. Copper stood up from the rug and came around the table and pressed his head against her knee. She put her hand on his warm, broad skull and felt him lean into her, steady, patient. And she thought, this is a dog with a job. This is a dog who has decided. "Thank you," she said. It was inadequate. She said it 3 more times, and it was still inadequate. The next Tuesday, when Preston Hollis and Michelle Vega returned to Birchwood Lane unannounced, they found the living room full. Karen was there. Tom was there. He had driven up from Charlottesville the night before. Ray was there in his recliner, in his good cardigan. And on the sofa opposite Ray, sitting perfectly upright with a cup of coffee balanced on his knee, was Frank Dolan, in a clean flannel shirt and pressed dungarees, with Copper the golden retriever lying at his feet, chin on paws, red bandana bright as a signal flare. "Preston," Karen said pleasantly from the doorway to the kitchen. "You didn't call ahead." Preston looked at Frank. He looked at the dog. He looked at Tom, who was leaning against the fireplace with his arms folded and his lawyer's face on. "I brought Michelle. We were in town. I thought I would just introduce her." "You've introduced her," Karen said. "You may go." "Karen, sweetheart, don't be like this. This is family. This is family." Karen gestured at the room. "Ray, Tom, Frank, the dog. This right here is family, and you are not welcome to come into my father's house without calling." Michelle Vega, who was a professional and had been a professional a long time, was already reading the room. She stepped back toward the door. "Mr. Hollis," she said quietly to Preston, "I don't think this is the appropriate context. Perhaps we should reschedule." "Reschedule for never," Tom said from the fireplace. He straightened. "Preston, I want to be clear about something. I've retained counsel for our father. Any communication about my father's care goes through his attorney now. His name is on this card." He walked forward and put a business card in Michelle Vega's hand. "Ms. Vega, I hope you understand. There is no basis for a report at this time. My father is under the daily care of his daughter and a live-in companion, has full access to his physician, has 3 cooked meals a day, and is engaged in a stable and regular routine. He is not isolated. He is not neglected. He is home." Michelle Vega looked at the card. She looked at Frank Dolan and Copper. She looked at Ray, who was watching the television, a game show, on which a woman was jumping up and down and hugging her husband because she had just won a car. Ray was smiling at her, a small, pleased, grandfatherly smile. Michelle Vega closed the folder in her hand. "I understand," she said. "Mr. Hollis, I don't think there's anything for me here." Preston's face went red. It was a slow red, from the collar up. He looked at Karen, he looked at Tom, he looked at Frank Dolan, who was looking calmly back at him with those January sky eyes. He looked at the dog, who lifted his head off his paws and returned Preston's look with a quiet steadiness that was, somehow, more damning than the humans. "You think this is over?" Preston said. "This isn't over. That house is going on the market one way or another. You cannot afford to keep him in it. You cannot afford the taxes. You cannot afford the roof. You cannot afford—" "Preston," Ray said suddenly. Everyone in the room turned. Ray had turned his head. He was looking at Preston. His eyes were clear. They were the clear old eyes of the man he had been 10 years ago, before the stroke, before the fog, and everyone in the room felt it. It was a lantern lit briefly in a long hallway. "Preston," Ray said again. "You always were a small boy, I remember. You used to come to Thanksgiving with your father, and you'd count the silver on the sideboard and ask your father if it was real silver. Every year, you'd count it. Do you remember?" Preston opened his mouth. He closed it. "It was not real silver," Ray said. "It was plate. It has always been plate. There is nothing in this house that is worth what you think it is worth. And I am still here." He turned back to the television. The lantern went out. The woman on the game show was climbing into the car, and Ray was smiling at her again, a small, pleased smile, and Ray Hollis was gone back to wherever his mind had begun to spend most of its days. But he had said it, and everyone in the room had heard him. Preston Hollis left that afternoon without another word. He drove off in his silver SUV, and Michelle Vega, who was a good woman who had come to Vermont because a distant cousin of her mother's had asked her to observe an elder situation, and who had understood in a single afternoon that she had been misused, called her office from her cell phone in the passenger seat and asked to be taken off the case. She wrote a formal letter the next day retracting any preliminary observations. Preston's attorney in Burlington called 2 days later to inform him that without a professional's report, the conservatorship petition was going nowhere. Preston did not come back to Heron Falls again for a long time. Karen thought, in the hours after Preston's silver SUV disappeared around the corner of Birchwood, that this was the end of it. She sat on the porch with Tom and Frank and drank a beer she had not planned on drinking. And Copper lay on the porch boards between the three of them, and the four of them, 3 humans and a dog, watched the sun set behind the sugar maples, and Karen thought, "We won." She was wrong. But it was a nice thing to have thought, for the length of an evening. The following 2 weeks were the best weeks Karen had had with her father in a year. Frank moved his coffee pot and a duffel bag of clothes into the small cottage behind the barn on his own property. But he was at Ray's house by 7 every morning. He made oatmeal with brown sugar. He made scrambled eggs the way Ruth had made them, soft and slow, because he had asked Karen how her mother had made them, and Karen had shown him. He walked with Ray to the bench every afternoon. Copper walked with them. Sometimes Karen came too. Sometimes she stayed at work knowing they were fine. Ray began to sleep better. He began to laugh once in a while. He remembered Tom's name 3 times in a row one Sunday, and Tom, on the phone with Karen that evening, could not talk for a full minute because he was crying. And then, at the end of October, on a Thursday evening, Copper did not come home. Frank noticed at 7. Copper had gone out through the dog door as usual around 3:30, met Ray at the front porch of the little blue house at 4, walked with him to the bench and left him at the driveway at 6 the way he always did. Frank had checked with Karen. Karen had watched Copper leave, but by 7, when he should have been back at Frank's kitchen door begging for supper, he had not returned. Frank waited until 7:30. He waited until 8. Then he called Karen. "Copper hasn't come home." Karen felt cold. "What do you mean he hasn't come home? He always comes back by 7. He hasn't come back. I've walked the road. I've called him." They spent the evening looking. Karen drove Birchwood Lane. Frank drove the route to the park. Tom, who was still in town for a few days, drove out to Ridge Road and walked the woods behind Frank's barn with a flashlight. They called Copper's name until their voices went ragged. They stopped at every house. Nobody had seen him. Karen finally went home at 11 because she had to be up for Ray. She sat in the kitchen with the lights out and stared at the coffee pot and told herself Copper was somewhere warm. She told herself he had run after a deer. She told herself he would come back. She did not believe herself. The next morning, when Frank came over to make Ray breakfast, they found Ray already up and standing at the kitchen window. He was looking out at Birchwood Lane. His face was grey. "Where's the dog?" Ray said. "Dad," Karen said. "Dad, sit down." "Where is the dog?" He turned. His eyes were the clear eyes again. He looked at Frank. He looked at Karen. He looked back out the window. "Where is he?" "We don't know," Frank said gently. "He didn't come home last night. We are looking for him." Ray sat down at the kitchen table very slowly. He put both his palms flat on the surface. He did not eat his eggs. He did not drink his coffee. He sat there for a full hour, and then he got up and put on his coat and his brown walking shoes and said, "I'm going to find him, Dad. I'm going to find him, Karen. He would find me. I'm going to find him." He walked. Karen and Frank walked with him. They walked all of Birchwood Lane. They walked Elm Street Park. They walked the gravel path down to the bench. Copper was not at the bench. There was nothing at the bench but the oak leaves floating on the pond. Ray sat down on the bench for a long moment and did not speak. Then he stood up and said, "He is not here. We have to look somewhere else." They looked all afternoon. They put up flyers. They called the animal shelter in the next county. They knocked on doors. And by dusk they had found nothing. And Ray was exhausted. And Karen coaxed him home and put him to bed. And Ray lay in his bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. And Karen sat in the chair by his bed and held his hand and watched him not sleep. Around midnight he turned his head on the pillow and said, "Karen." "Yes, Daddy. Your mother sent him." "Daddy, don't. Your mother sent him to me. She sent him, and I have lost him. I have lost him, Karen. Daddy, we will find him. We will find him. I have lost him." He closed his eyes then. He slept. Karen sat in the chair and watched her father sleep and understood that if they did not find that dog, they would not just be losing an animal. They would be losing something in Ray she did not know how to name and would not get back. At 6 in the morning on Saturday, Frank Dolan called. His voice was hoarse. "Karen, I've had a thought." "What?" "Preston." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You think Preston took him?" "I don't know, but your cousin was cornered by that dog in a sense. That dog was the thing that made Ray look like he had a life. That dog was the reason Michelle Vega closed her folder. Preston is a small man. Small men do small things. I have a bad feeling." She called Tom. Tom, who was back in Charlottesville, said the words that Karen had not been able to bring herself to say. "Car, if Preston did anything to that dog, anything, he is not walking away from it." Frank drove into town that morning. Karen met him at the little coffee shop on the square. They sat at a table in the back, and Frank pulled out a small notebook, the kind old men still carry in their breast pockets, and started writing. "I've been thinking all night," Frank said. "There are 3 animal shelters within an hour of here. There's a couple of boarding kennels. There is one boarding kennel I know of that will take a dog for cash without asking many questions. It's out in Fairfax, run by a fellow named Pettibone. If somebody wanted to make a dog disappear for a while without hurting him, because I don't think even your cousin is going to hurt a dog, ma'am, that's a line most people don't cross. That is where they would take him." "You think Preston drove to Fairfax?" "I think Preston paid somebody local to drive to Fairfax. Preston does not get his own hands dirty. Preston never has." "Who local?" Frank tapped his pen against the notebook. "Well, If I had to guess, there is a fellow named Kyle Marston who does odd jobs around Ridge Road and does not ask a lot of questions himself. Preston stayed with the Trumballs when he came to town, and the Trumballs have used Kyle for handyman work for years. I would start with Kyle. They started with Kyle. Frank drove. Kyle Marston lived in a small trailer at the end of a rutted lane off Route 15, and when Frank knocked on the metal door, Kyle answered in a stained sweatshirt with his eyes still half closed. Frank stepped inside without being invited. Karen stayed behind him. "Kyle," Frank said pleasantly, "you've done some good work for me over the years. I want to ask you a straight question, and I want a straight answer." "Frank, a fellow named Preston Hollis. He was in town the day before yesterday. Did he pay you to move a dog for him?" Kyle Marston, who was maybe 32 years old and not a bad person in any deep way, but was chronically short of rent money, looked at Frank and looked at Karen, and his face did the thing that faces do when a person has been caught. "Oh, Frank. Where is the dog?" "Frank, I didn't hurt him. I did not lay a hand on him. The guy paid me $200 to drive the dog out to Fairfax and drop him at Pettibones under a fake name for 2 weeks. He said the family needed a break. He said the dog was a nuisance and the old man wouldn't let them get rid of him, but the old man wasn't going to notice after a while. Said he'd double it if I kept my mouth shut." Karen felt her hands clench. "Kyle," Frank's voice had gone very soft, "you are going to get in my truck now. You're going to drive with us to Fairfax. You are going to walk into Pettibones, and you are going to identify that dog, and you are going to sign him back out under your name. And then you are going to come with us to the Heron Falls Police Department, and you are going to tell them everything you just told me. Do you understand?" "Frank, I can't afford." "Kyle, that dog is a service animal to a man with dementia in this town. That's felony territory. I am giving you a chance to be a witness instead of a defendant. Do you understand?" Kyle understood. Kyle got in the truck. At Pettibones Kennels in Fairfax, in the third run from the left, they found Copper. He was thin. His eyes were dull. His red bandana was gone. He was lying on the concrete floor of the run, with his chin on his paws, and when he saw Frank, his whole body seized up in that recognition that dogs do, the small, full body startle, and he was on his feet and pressed against the chain link, and making a sound Karen had never heard from a dog before. A low, urgent whimper that was not pain and not joy, but something else, something like relief so big it did not know how to come out of a throat. Frank Dolan knelt down and put his forehead against the fence. "I'm sorry, buddy," he said. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry I didn't come sooner." Copper pressed his nose against Frank's forehead through the wire. His tail was moving so hard his whole rear end was moving with it. They got him out. They put him in the back seat of the truck. They drove home. They stopped once for water, which Copper drank in 3 gulps. Karen sat in the back seat with him and put her hand on his warm, broad head and told him over and over that he was going home and he was safe, and there was a man on Birchwood Lane who needed him and had not slept. And Copper listened with those steady, soft brown eyes and understood, Karen thought, at least the shape of what she was saying. The reunion at Birchwood Lane broke her. Ray was in the recliner. He had not eaten breakfast. He had not spoken since morning. He was staring at the window, at the empty sidewalk beyond. When Karen opened the front door and Copper came trotting in ahead of her, a little unsteady, a little thin, but home, Ray turned his head. He looked at the dog. He looked. His mouth opened. "You," he said. Just the one word. "You." Copper crossed the living room in 3 strides and pushed his whole big head into Ray's lap. Ray leaned forward. He put both his arms around the dog's neck. He put his face against the top of Copper's head. And Ray Hollis, 78-year-old retired postman, with a stroke and a soft memory, wept into the fur of the golden retriever with the strength of a man who had been holding it in for 4 years and had finally been given permission to let it out. Karen and Tom, standing in the doorway, cried too. Frank Dolan stood at the front window and looked out at the street, blinking, and did not say a word. Kyle Marston, Karen would learn later, drove straight from Pettibone's Kennels to the Heron Falls Police Department that same afternoon and gave a full written statement. He had a small camera on his phone with 2 videos on it. Videos he had filmed for his own protection when he had taken the money. Videos that showed Preston Hollis handing him cash in the parking lot of a diner on Route 15 with the words, 2 weeks, keep it quiet, and if the old man asks, the dog got hit by a car, clearly audible on the recording. It was, as Tom would dryly observe afterwards, the single stupidest piece of evidence Preston could possibly have produced against himself, and it was more than enough. Preston was charged with theft of a service animal, conspiracy and cruelty by deprivation. His attorney in Burlington politely declined to represent him further. The story ran in the Heron Falls Register 3 weeks later, and then it ran in the Burlington Free Press, and then it ran on a syndicated wire that took it into papers in Boston and Providence, and even one in New York. And by the second week of November, there was a photograph of Copper sitting on the porch of Frank Dolan's little cottage behind the barn, red bandana replaced, eyes bright, running above a headline that read, "The dog who wouldn't let an old man be forgotten." Preston Hollis lost his real estate license the following year. His wife filed for divorce. His business partners bought him out at a heavy discount. He moved to a small apartment in a suburb of Boston and did not attend Ray's funeral when the time came. Though someone forwarded him the obituary, he did not come to Vermont again. Ray Hollis lived 7 more months. They were, Karen would say later, the best 7 months. Frank Dolan was at the house every morning. Copper was there every afternoon. Ray walked to the bench every day the weather allowed. Some days he could tell you what year it was, and some days he could not, but every day he could tell you the way to the pond. And every day when he sat down on the bench and Copper laid his head in his lap, his face went still in that particular way, the way a man's face goes when he has arrived where he was going. On a bright morning in the middle of the following May, when the maples along Birchwood Lane were leafing out in that first tender green that always seems too soft to survive, Ray Hollis died in his sleep in his own bed in his own house, with the window open to the sound of the birds. Karen was in the kitchen making his coffee. She heard the change in his breathing through the open door. She went in and sat on the edge of the bed and held his hand. And Copper, who had been curled up on the rug beside the bed the way he had been every night for months, stood up and put his front paws on the mattress and pressed his cool nose against Ray's cheek. And Ray drew one long breath and let it out and went. There was no struggle, there was no fear. His face went still and stayed still. And it was the same stillness Karen had seen at the bench, the stillness of arrival. Tom drove up that afternoon from Charlottesville and did not go back for 2 weeks. He and Karen made the arrangements together the way they had made almost nothing together in 20 years. Frank Dolan came to the funeral in a dark suit that was one size too big for him and stood at the graveside with his hat in his hands. Copper stood beside him, still, patient, tail down. Mrs. Ellery came in her Sunday coat and cried into a lace handkerchief. Kyle Marston came, which surprised Karen, and stood at the back with his cap in his hands and his eyes red. And afterwards Karen went over and shook his hand and thanked him, and Kyle nodded and could not speak. They buried Ray next to Ruth in Elm Street Cemetery up the hill from the park. The plot had a view of the pond, if you knew where to look through the trees. 2 weeks after the funeral, Karen went to the Parks Department office and paid, with her own money, for a second small bronze plaque to be added to the bench at the pond. The Parks people were, as her father had once said, real nice about it. They did not charge her hardly nothing. The new plaque went up on a Saturday in June. It sat beside the first one, matching in size, matching in shape, the metal fresh and bright against the older green-edged bronze of Ruth's. The words on it were simple, unfussy, chosen by a woman who had learned from her father not to have much use for flourish. In memory of Ray Hollis, who found his way home every day, and of Copper, who showed him. Karen went to the bench that afternoon by herself. It was a warm, still day. The oak trees were in full leaf. The pond was the color of old glass. She sat down. She ran her fingers over the letters of both plaques. She looked out at the water for a long time, and she thought about the storm night in October when she had pounded on her father's screen door in the rain, and about the frightened bark she had heard in the yard behind her, and about all the things she had learned in the weeks that came after, about her mother's quiet mornings on this bench, about a widower named Frank Dolan and his old golden retriever, about a dog who had made a choice, and about a man who had walked to a bench every day for 4 years, because some part of him, deeper than words, still knew the way back to the person he loved. She thought about how she had almost listened to her cousin, about how easy it would have been to sell the house, put her father in a place with a garden and a small chapel and strangers to feed him, and tell herself she had done the right thing. About how her father would have died within a season in that place, quiet and confused and far from the pond, and about how she would not have known, until it was much too late, exactly what she had traded away. She thought about how sometimes love does not look like love at first. Sometimes it looks like a stray dog on a sidewalk. Sometimes it looks like a stranger on a bench across the water. Sometimes it looks like an old man crying into the fur of a retriever in a living room on Birchwood Lane, because his wife has been gone 4 years, and this is the first time he has been able to let it out. Sometimes it looks like a plaque bolted to the back of a bench that a man never told his children about because it was not for them. She thought about how her mother had known things her children had not known about her, and how that had turned out to be a kindness, not a hiding. She thought about how the dog had come, and how the dog had stayed, and how the dog had made all the difference. A shadow fell across the bench beside her. Karen looked up. Frank Dolan was standing on the path with his hat in his hand and Copper at his side. The old golden retriever, whose muzzle was going white around the edges now, looked at Karen with those steady, soft brown eyes and moved his tail slowly, patiently, in the arc that Karen would have recognized in the dark. "Mind if we sit?" Frank said. "Please." He sat down on the far end of the bench. Copper lay down on the grass at their feet with a small, satisfied groan, his chin on his paws, his tail moving softly against the ground. "I brought your father's coffee cup," Frank said. He set a small chipped white mug on the bench between them. "The blue one, with the crack in the handle. I found it in my truck. He must have left it there one afternoon. I thought you'd want it." "Thank you, Frank." He nodded. They sat for a while. The pond was quiet. The oak leaves stirred overhead. A duck came out of the reeds and paddled a slow circle in the middle of the water. "He was a good man, ma'am," Frank said at last. "He was." "So was your mother a good woman?" "She was. I miss them both." "I do too." Copper sighed at their feet. Karen reached down and rested her hand on his warm, broad head and felt him lean gently into her palm, and she thought about all the ways a life can bend around a small, brave animal, and all the ways a small, brave animal can carry a life without ever knowing that is what it is doing. If this story moved you, please leave a comment about a moment in your own life when a small kindness or an unexpected friend showed up exactly when you needed one. I read everyone. Give it a like so more people find it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. From all of us on Birchwood Lane, thank you for listening. And wherever you are in the world tonight, may there be a bench waiting for you and someone who remembers the way.